It is not a radical idea to say that in America, if you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty.
Despite taking Hawaii's minimum wage up to $9.25 an hour and a scheduled increase to $10.10 effective next year, Hawaii's minimum wage workers are faced with the biggest gap nationally between the state's minimum wage and the basic wage required to meet Hawaii's high cost of living. Should we change the minimum wage to a living wage? This live broadcast of Insights on PBS Hawaii starts now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Yanji Denise. In 2015, Hawaii's minimum wage was $7.75 an hour. That same year, a Massachusetts Institute of Technology study found that a living wage, or the amount that a single adult with one child living on Oahu must earn to meet the basic standard of living, was almost $30 an hour. The living wage needed to reside on the neighbor islands was only about $5 less an hour. Add more children and more non-working adults into the household, and the living wage exponentially rises on all islands. Hawaii's minimum wage has increased twice since that 2015 MIT report. In 2016, it went up to $8.50 an hour. This year, it rose to $9.25, and next year, it will reach $10.10 an hour. During this legislative session, there were bills in the House and Senate proposing increases in the minimum wage. The Hawaii Chamber of Commerce, as well as several small businesses, spoke in opposition. Both bills, as well as other legislation that would have provided tax relief for low-income earners, died for the session. The question remains, should we change the minimum wage to a living wage? We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet us your questions, and you'll find a live stream for this program at pbshawaii.org. Now to our guest tonight. Nicole Wu is a senior policy analyst with the Hawaii Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice. The center advocates for changes of the systems that perpetuate inequality and injustice. Pono Chong is the Vice President of Business Advocacy and Development for the Hawaii Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber has testified against the bills to raise the minimum wage. Sumner LaCroix is a University of Hawaii at Manoa Professor of Economics. He is also a University of Hawaii Economic Research Organization, or UHERO Research Fellow. And State Representative Kaniela Ing serves the 11th House District on Maui. That includes areas of Kihei, Wailea, and Makena. Representative Ing and State Senator Carl Rhodes sponsored bills during this current legislative session to raise the minimum wage. We also tried to schedule individuals who are getting by on low-paying or minimum wage-based salaries. Not surprisingly, they were all just too busy working to join us tonight. We want to set the stage with the basics, and I guess we'll start with you, Professor, and that is, what is a living wage and a minimum wage? Tell us the difference.
Well, a minimum wage is just the smallest wage that an employer can pay an employee. There's a few exemptions to that. There's certain types of employees that are exempt. If you're a teenager, the first 90 days you can be paid lower wage. There are some people who are disabled where lower wages can be paid. But in general, in the state of Hawaii, you have to be paid $9.25 an hour if you're going to be employed legally.
And then when we look at a living wage, when we talk about that, that sort of standard is very different. We're talking, in this case, quite a bit higher.
Right. So a living wage is an attempt essentially to say, what would somebody need to pay for the essentials? One can dispute what the essentials are, but there's a pretty good market basket of goods that's been put together by a research center at MIT, and they come out with about $30 an hour for a family of two with one child. So it'd be a family of three in total, 2 adults, 1 child, where one of the adults is working.
And you brought us some data with you, if we could call that up right now. There's a slide that you brought us that kind of shows us the difference there. We have it on screen. The living wage there, $15.78, $30 for two. The poverty wage, $11.
Right. It does show some of the difficulties of trying to set a living wage. If we're trying to set a living wage for an adult, it might be around $16. If we're trying to set it for a family of 3, it's about $30. It's difficult to mandate different wages for people in different social situations. This is one of the problems people face when they think about a living wage. Living wages are difficult too because the living wage may not correspond to the productivity of the employee. But it's interesting to look at, because I think the point that was made in the initial clip by Bernie Sanders is a good one. If somebody's working 40 hours a week and they're an adult and they're working hard with good morale, then exactly why is it that we would allow a lesser wages to be paid? That's more of a moral question for society. From the economic question, the question is an employer isn't going to pay a wage that's more than the person's productivity. And economists fear that if we have too high of a minimum wage rate set, that will essentially be driving some people out of the labor market who are relatively low productivity people for a variety of reasons.
Nicole, I want to get to you and that gap in Hawaii, that increase is that difference is so vast. How do we measure up compared to the rest of the country?
Well, our minimum wage is we're one of the few states that actually has a minimum wage that's higher than the national. There are 29 states in the District of Columbia that have higher minimum wages, and we have the 14th highest minimum wage in the nation. But we also have the highest cost of living in the nation. So when you actually look at our minimum wage and control it for the cost of living, we have one of the lowest minimum wages compared to other states when you look at how much our rent is, our utilities, food costs, and things like that.
And when you think about us versus somewhere else in the nation, do we see that kind of a gap? Are we the worst in that sense?
We have some of the worst gaps between our wages, our average wages, and the cost of living. And I think you can see it on our streets. We have a lot of houseless, we have a lot of doubled up families. And I have a friend who recently was talking about how he works part-time at the 24-hour fitness. And he says a lot of folks come in the morning to use the showers. They're homeless, and they're going to work in the morning. And so he's seeing it just, working at the gym. And I think that's a real story of what we have here in Hawaii. There's a lot of even hidden poverty that a lot of us don't realize when we go to a Starbucks or go to a restaurant and don't realize that the person serving us might not actually have a place to live and sleep at night.
Mm-hmm. Representative Ng, I know that you tried to introduce legislation to work on this, but it died this session. Why do you think there isn't necessarily the political will to make this happen?
Well, we just raised the minimum wage in 2014, I believe, and it wasn't nearly far enough. We were asking for $12 at the time. It only got up to $10.10. I think that's next year. So folks are saying, at least let those increases play out before you try to revisit it. But this isn't, as was mentioned earlier, this is a social problem. We don't raise or lower the minimum wage to control for employment or unemployment. To change the minimum wage to a living wage is to do what the law was originally intended for, which is protect the most vulnerable among us from predation. And when you go back to FDR, he said, if you cannot afford to pay your employees a living wage, you cannot afford to do business in America. And it makes sense. You go back to the beginning of capitalism, it's the serfdom days where gypsies used to take, the folks that weren't included in the system would find goods in one area, buy it, find an area where it's more scarce and sell it for more. And folks are like, man, how is this person making so much money? And then they talk to him like, how about you work for me and do the same thing? That relationship only works if you can provide that person's living. If you expect them to show up for work and not die, then you need to pay them a living wage, or else the money comes from somewhere else, which is usually through the government, through social programs and welfare. And that's a whole other discussion. But someone has to pay the living wage. It's either going to come from the employee, which it should be morally, or it's going to come from the government.
Ponachong, of course, you represent the other side on this, and we talked about feeling good versus doing good before we got started tonight. Tell us about that position.
So for the chamber, as you mentioned, this year we did oppose the minimum wage increase bill this year, as Representative Ng had said, because we're still playing out, there is one more increase coming up next year to 10.10, and I think many of the businesses want to see how that is going to impact their company as well as their employees. In 2014, actually, the chamber did support an increase in the minimum wage, but what we wanted to see is something gradual and not steep and quick, so to speak. And I think that was our concern. In the end, many of our businesses in the state pay more than minimum wage. They offer varying benefits to take care of their employees. They want to create a good working environment and take care of and take care of them because they help them in their company. One of the things that we also point out is Hawaii is the only state in the nation that has prepaid health care, which mandates from employee one, no matter, you don't have to be big. If you have one employee, you have to provide health care to that employee if they work more than 20 hours a week. This adds anywhere from about $3.50 an hour to $7 an hour of compensation, which most people don't talk about, especially when they compare us to other states. That is one thing that makes Hawaii different. We're the only state in the country that has it. We're the only ones with the ERISA exemption, and it's a big cost and big benefit to the employees. So we think that if we're going to talk about minimum wage, that should be part of the discussion as well.
Is there somewhat of a sweet spot? Is there a place that that the two of you can meet in the middle? If it's not 15 and it's not 10-10, is there somewhere in the middle that businesses are able to get to so that we get closer to this? Or is there just an opposition to any increase at all?
I think going back to the professor's opening statement when you had asked the difference between living wage and minimum wage, I think that is the discussion, and that's a philosophical difference. I think we think the minimum wage is a minimum wage. It's a starting point. There are many first-time workers, unskilled, students who are part of that working group. It's their first job. They're being giving workplace skills. So that is, I think, the difference in discussion, so to speak, between those who think there should be a minimum wage versus a living wage.
And this is not only happening in Hawaii, this is around the country right now. A lot of states are experimenting with this. What are we seeing as this sort of pans out in other states? What's the experiences of small businesses there?
Just a couple points. So some of the experiences we see here in Hawaii, where I go to a dinner party and people are talking about, are my kids going to be able to live here because of high housing prices and their worries about the job market? You can go to the same dinner party in Seattle or San Diego or San Francisco and find the exact same worries being expressed. I mean, we need to be very careful here about thinking like this is an island problem. This is one of these nationwide problems. We're in big cities that are desirable to live in. Housing prices have soared, and it's made the cost of living for people who are in the bottom 30% of the income distribution, and for many of the rest of us too, but in particular, people at the bottom 1/3 of the income distribution, it's raised their cost of living substantially. And people just worry about what really is going to be happening to our particular society. Now, in the past, I mean, if I took a snapshot of when I first came to the University of Hawaii in the early 1980s, the literature on the minimum wage was uniformly negative. It basically emphasized the disemployment effects of the minimum wage, and there was some reasonable evidence to that effect. In recent years, there's been an effort to restudy the issue, and now what we're finding is that increases in the minimum wage have not led to increased unemployment. Okay? And one of the things that they've tended to do is they've tended to bring some more productive people who are not participating in the job market into the job market. Now again, this often tends to be kids from upper income families. And they enter the job market, they see the higher wages, and their parents are like, go earn some money. Or the kids are like, hey dad, I have a job. But what you find is that there are more people entering the labor market, and that at the higher minimum wage, the morale in the firm often tends to be better. And people tend to work harder. They're earning more money and they want to keep the job. So they pay more attention to showing up and showing up rested and being ready to work. So these types of things are important. And so we haven't found the same disemployment effects. Now there's worries that if you increase the wage a lot, that there will be some disemployment effects, that at some point those will kick in. Right. And that's something that we don't really have good evidence on at this point. As a nation, we're starting to experiment with this. But the recent increases in the minimum wage have not led to the unemployment that we saw previously. And so then that gives some hope that at least this might be a reasonably effective tool at combating poverty in the United States, right. or at least reducing inequality between the top 10% and the lower 20%.
I would say I was in Summer's class in 2007, and he wasn't so pro minimum wage then. So
that's true.
And he's not the only economist, that shifted their views. We're seeing states with high unemployment and low minimum wages. We're seeing states with high minimum wages and low unemployment. You can't put cities or jurisdictions in a lab, right, and control for these things. So you got to go off of this sort of more macro social data, and it's often unreliable because seriousness. Maybe the economy is just doing better. Maybe there's certain sectors in that area that's outperforming others. But when you have neighboring jurisdictions in Oregon with similar demographics, and one raises the wage and one doesn't, and if one employment gets affected and one not the other, that's the most reliable data we're going to find. when you're talking about these sorts of social issues. And the data is clear that it's not affecting unemployment. But and it's encouraging to see all these economists come out and say this. What is frustrating is when you're talking about a dinner party, when you see professors, writers, politicians talking about, well, this may or may not hurt certain sectors, but meanwhile they enjoy working 40 hours and having time off for their kids or for activities, but they feel like there are others in the society who don't deserve that.
Do you really feel like that is at its core? I mean,
that is the issue at its core.
I'm not sure that that Mr. Chong would agree with you that there are necessarily business owners who think that there are people who are undeserving of a lifestyle that you're talking
when I posted
about.
this video about a news story about my proposal to raise the minimum wage, there's lots of people saying, people who flip burgers shouldn't be this is supposed to be a temporary job. The fact is, 2/3 of workers, minimum wage workers, are women. 2/3 of minimum wage workers are over the age of 25. Right?
What's your response to that?
Like I said, I mean, for many of our members and small businesses in the community, they try and provide the best for their employees and provide what the consumer is also willing to pay. I think that's a missing point of the overall discussion as well, is what is the consumer in the end willing to pay? When we took a look at one of the bills, when I think it was the Senate version, raising it to $15 right away. If you add in prepaid health care benefits, I mean, you're talking of a minimum wage of almost $24 an hour. So then you have to ask yourself, what type of business? Because some businesses are able to pay that, and they pay that now and provide that benefit, but there are going to be certain businesses that are going to have a harder time. And then you can have an adjustment in the marketplace. And you will have winners and losers, and there will be some people who will get the additional income due to the increase in minimum wage, and there will be other people where the business model did not work for that company, and then that business will no longer exist. So I think that's needs to be part of the discussion. I don't think anybody's sinisterly going, oh yeah, we want to keep you down. It's just what is, I think, the stress of the overall marketplace and what they're willing to pay and bear.
Well, I was speaking to not the intentions of business owners, but to just capitalism in general. Adam Smith, right, the founder of American modern capitalism, said so himself. Like, employers are going to try to make as much, and the employers are going to try to pay as little as possible. And there's going to have to be some kind of catch in the middle, and there's probably going to have to be some kind of government intervention. Adam Smith was the first proponent for a minimum wage. Right, and so it's not saying that these business owners are doing anything nefarious. It's just they're going to do what's best for their business, and it's up to government to make sure that it's fair and that the person and you hit it on the head. It's like, how much are people willing to pay? The job market is different than other markets, because if I want to buy Coca-Cola and it's $1, but then next door there's Coca-Cola for 80 cents, I might go next door. But when you're stuck in a low-wage job and you're not that mobile, you don't have a car, your kids go to a certain school, you don't have that many options. So it's a distorted market.
Well, Nicole, I want to bring you in.
So they can pay you below market, and I think to me that's the problem.
Yeah, I want to get your take on this. What are we seeing? Is there a point where businesses will shutter, which is what the chamber is concerned about, or how do we balance that with the rights and the needs of the workers?
Right. Well, as the professor said, the minimum wage is one of the most studied topics in economics over the last 20 years, and I actually worked on some of them. And as he said, we've seen a lot of minimum wage increases. I think there's been something like dozens of increases in the minimum wage in states and cities around the nation since about 1990. They've all been gradual, and as Professor says, there have been no significant job losses. And some researchers, some that I used to work with, have looked into it, and labor costs are a relatively small portion of the cost of a business. They tend to be able to deal with these minimum wage increases by increasing productivity, reducing turnover costs, which are very major costs for employers. So if their workers are more loyal and more productive, it actually saves the business money. Sometimes there's wage compression where the executives make a little bit less. And there are some slight increases in prices. But on the flip side, every worker is also a consumer. And Henry Ford raised the wages for his workers because he said famously that he wanted his factory line workers to be able to afford to buy one of his cars. And we know that low-wage workers spend their money in the economy, and it actually could create a very virtuous cycle where the local businesses have more customers who can pay their prices, we get more business, they can create more jobs in the end. So, here in Hawaii, we've seen 2 years of minimum wage increases since 2015, and the unemployment rate has gone down. There's a lot of reasons for that, but we haven't seen massive job losses over the last 2 years. So it seems to be going okay here.
We're very close to full employment.
Yeah,
I mean, we have a very low unemployment rate.
Yeah, it went from 4% to 2.8, which is unbelievable.
So if we get to $15 an hour, would we then suddenly have a state that's flush with cash?
I think, well, some of it depends on the rate, as we were saying. If it's like $1 a year, I think most businesses could handle it. I mean, people, we'd have to talk, but
they might have to raise prices,
right?
Menu items, but like entrees by $1 or 50 cents. I think that's something I'm willing to pay for as a consumer.
And I think, as both of you mentioned, there's a portion. I mean, I think people are saying yes, we're willing to pay more, but I do think a couple of things I want to make a quick point is, one is, while that might be the case, at some point people only have so much disposable income. So at some point they are going to consume less, even though they're paying more for the item. So at some point, those people, right, whether their car breaks or they have their kids' college fund or their 401k, those things, right, are they're going to still put money away on those things. So that disposable income for that non-minimum wage group is still going to be a set amount. And then the one thing I do want to mention is, and there's not a lot of data locally in terms of whether or not there was a lot of job loss, but if you look at the BLS, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, for certain low income, low wage earners, especially in the food prep area, if you look at the minimum wage increases in 06, 07, and you look at the ones in the last 2 years, there is job loss there. Because whether or not that was because some companies closed, whether or not some of there were bad food restaurants and they just shut down for whatever reason, but there is a shift in some of the areas. I'm not saying it's because of the minimum wage increase, but I'm saying you do have other factors as well.
I want to bring in the audience because we're getting a lot of responses on this, and this one is for Representative Ng. The idea that Anonymous in Honolulu writing into us tonight saying they should cut taxes instead of raising the minimum wage. What about approaching it from that perspective? Is that a way, is there more political will to perhaps cut taxes than to raise the minimum wage?
Cut taxes for who?
For low-wage workers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
And I think Nicole Wu, Appleseed, has been working on these issues for a long time. We passed a small food credit bill, but there is no single piece of legislation that can impact our most vulnerable greater than the living wage legislation. That's the single most impactful law that we could pass.
It didn't make it this time. Do you expect this to come up again next session?
I really hope so, and I hope we can build a grassroots movement from the ground up. Right. The cities and states that's been successful, it's been from fast food workers organizing, doing strikes, SEIU. We don't have the SEIU union here in Hawaii, so that sets us back a little. These workers aren't organized. I wish they were. I wish we could, let's all get jobs in Jack in the Box and try it, That's how they used to do it back in the day, back in the 60s. And here in Hawaii, there was a strong labor movement, and it just kind of is taking a back seat. I'm not saying that unions aren't still necessary and powerful in the state. They are, but the grassroots energy that used to be there has sort of fizzled away, and that's what's really driving these Fight for 15 movements across the nation.
Now, an alternative to the minimum wage is the earned income tax credit. At the federal level, there is an earned income tax credit. It's essentially a wage subsidy to people who have relatively low incomes. At the federal level, you have to be married. The wage credit tends to be bigger if you have children.
You don't have to be married. You have to have children.
You have to have children. You don't have to be married. Okay. In some states, you get the state credit. You have to be married.
I didn't know that.
But basically, the earned income tax credit is a wage subsidy. And a wage subsidy essentially means that people are given more incentives to enter the wage market. It increases employment. It lowers costs of employment to firms. The downside of the earned income tax credit is, it leads to a loss of tax revenue for the state. So if the state wants to replace the tax revenue, it needs to find a tax to replace that revenue. But looked at from a number of perspectives, the ultimate reason to have a minimum wage is to try to alleviate poverty, to raise incomes at the lower level. That's the same goal that the Earned Income Tax Credit does. There's a lot to be said to use both tools simultaneously.
Absolutely.
I mean, not just to focus on the minimum wages, but also to focus on the Earned Income Tax Credit.
The living wage legislation, it should be clear, that's not supposed to be a silver bullet to ameliorate poverty or eliminate poverty in Hawaii. And actually, that question was directed at me, but I think Nicole could do a much better job answering.
Well, there are actually 3 bills still alive in the legislature with the Earned Income Tax Credit, or we call it the Working Family Credit. Some folks call it that, because it really is directed towards working families. And so there are 3 bills that are still alive with that tax credit, so that Hawaii could join the 26 states and the District of Columbia that have state-level earned income tax credits. And I think since our cost of living is so high, our workers deserve it more than any others.
On a day-to-day basis, what kind of a difference is that going to make in someone's pocketbook?
Well, one nice thing about the EITC, or the Working Family Credit, is that it addresses some of the issues that Sumner was talking about in terms of adjusting it to the number of dependents, the size of the family. So if you have more kids, you get a larger tax credit. So it really kind of depends on your family size for you to get a credit. But on the federal level, let's say, or on the state level, I looked at this single mom making the minimum wage is making about $18,500 a year. She could get about a $332 earned income tax credit here if it was set at 10% of the federal. So one of the bills is at 10%, another one of the bills that's still alive would set the state credit at 20% of the federal, so that mom would get a $664 approximately tax credit. And we know from Aloha United Way that recently had these pilot grants to help people avoid eviction. That was about the amount of money that families needed to avoid eviction. So everything's linked. And one of the basic reasons for houselessness here is just not being able to pay your rent. You have a bill, a doctor's bill, a car repair, and you just fall behind.
And you can't afford a studio with the current minimum wage.
And your average family in Hawaii, is earning about $83,000 per year. Okay, I'm sorry, that's your median family. So about 50% of the families earn more, 50% of families earn less. So if we're talking about Oahu, we're up over $90,000 per family. But we're talking about families that are earning $12,000 to $15,000. If we talk about an earned income tax credit that's only $300, $400, $500, $600 a year, it may sound small to that family that's earning $90,000 a year, but for the family that's earning $12,000 a year, that's a significant amount of money. That's a lot of groceries that can be paid for. And it comes at a relatively small cost to the state. So the federal disbursement from the federal earned income tax credit is about $219 million last year. So if we just piggybacked off the federal program, it would cost the state about $21 million for a 10%. For a 10% credit. That may sound like a lot. It may sound like a lot, and it'd be nice to move it up to 20, but we could phase it in over a period of time. And those things make a big difference to families that are barely getting by in the state.
Where's the chamber on the state EITC?
We don't have a position on EITC.
We want to bring you back in, and our viewers are writing into you specifically, Mr. Chong. What effect will raising the minimum wage have on homelessness? That was the question, and I don't know that you're necessarily the person to answer that. But
I think, well, no, I'll take the question because I think it goes to the overall discussion we've been having. And reading your folks' testimony, it's in our testimony as well, is clearly there's the discussion of raising the minimum wage or creating a living wage to allow families to provide for themselves. And the number one issue that keeps coming up by far is not being able to pay the rent or not being able to afford a home or apartment or whatever. That is, I think, the 900-pound gorilla in the room that we're really not talking about. You could have $15 minimum wage, but if you still have houses running at $600,000 and $700,000, or I think you mentioned that an apartment for two is running at $1,600 or $1,800 a month. It's important, the discussion of wages, but at some point it's going to be a little academic because it's still not going to get you there. And I think while an important discussion, we're not talking about the cost of housing. That is the huge issue. And for us, it's something we have been trying to work on for many years. I mean, it took Castle and Cook, who built Mililani, to build the next one, Coral Ridge. It took them almost 10 years to get their permits, the entitlements. People were suing them. People wanted to keep it as ag land, which I understand. But where are we supposed to go? Where are we supposed to live? How is that going to work? They were going to provide 35,000 homes.
I think we all agree.
I think we can all agree on that. But, you know, as I was saying earlier, we have some evidence from Aloha United's Way's pilot program in this past year. They were surprised. They thought they were going to be helping people get out of houselessness. They helped 1,400 families avoid evictions, and the average grant was or just around $1,000.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it really is, you know, the type of wage increases we're talking about combined with tax credits, I think could really make a difference. It wouldn't solve the problem. As you said, there are no silver bullets. But we have to think of the different tools that we can use together. And the minimum wage, living wage is a key one.
It's really important to emphasize this point about this stuff is not a silver bullet. This is really stuff trying to cut away at the problem at the edges. If we increase the minimum wage by 10%, the best research on the topic shows that the percentage of people in poverty falls by 2.4%. So, for instance, we had a 10% increase in the minimum wage this year, approximately. And you know, what that should lead to then is a 2.4 reduction in poverty. We have another close to 10% increase coming up next year. That should lead to another 2.4%. So what does that mean in terms of numbers? There's 240,000 people in the state, by my figures, living in poverty. Okay. So last year's minimum wage should have brought about 5,000 of those people above the poverty line. And next year should bring 5,000 plus over the poverty line. So, okay, one way to look at this is a really half full glass. Maybe it's like a quarter full. Maybe it's an eighth full, where we've brought 10,000 people out of poverty. We still have 230,000 people left in poverty.
Now, of that
you can't
number,
really look at this as like a thing. But some of those people are still left in poverty, are still earning higher wages though. They're moving closer to the poverty line. Right. So it's not like those people are not affected.
Now, of those 240,000, how many are actually working? When you talk about living in poverty, are those people all employed?
Most people are working. There's some people who are disabled because of ill health.
We have a very low unemployment rate here. It's 2.8%.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, employment has been increasing here too. It's not just that we found people are leaving the job market because they're unable to find jobs. I mean, employment here has been increasing over the last few years.
I mean, I think we all want the same thing. We want to live in a community where people can afford their rent and they can afford to be with their families and you know, afford health care and afford all the basics. When you talk to your small business owners, though, what do they say? What are you hearing from them on this issue?
They were the ones who actually, it was in fact our small business committee, who said, you know, they, in 2014 said, you know, why don't we take a look at supporting it? We all want to provide more for our employees. You can't just say no to an increase and you can't say no forever. Let's be on the proactive side and say, okay, we're open to some sort of increase, just something that small businesses can handle. I mean, for us, we have 1,800 members throughout the state. 85% of them have less than 25 employees. So they are small businesses. And again, when we talk about compensation, right, for us, we think prepaid healthcare has to be part of it. If you have health, that's, I think, part of the discussion that gets lost is not just the benefit, but because it's mandated, when it was built into compensation. And healthcare inflation has outpaced every other inflation. So now it has become a huge part of compensation. So if you take somebody who earns $10 an hour in a 28-hour work week, that's $20,000 a year. The premiums are about $7,500 a year for somebody making $20,000 a year. So now, you know, I would say almost not half, but 40% is, you know, for healthcare, and every 5 to 9% increase in healthcare premiums, because employers pay 95% of the premium, is equivalent to a 2 to 3% in compensation benefit increase. So do we get credit for that? I mean, is that built into the discussion?
Well, yeah, it should be. Look, when Fono says, like, you know, living wage, but we should really be talking about housing, or okay, living wage, but we should really be talking about healthcare, it shouldn't be either or, it should be both and. And, you know, just the idea of our healthcare having to come from our employer is absurd. We've been so used to it for so long because that's just how it's been in America, but it's absurd. We need to move towards a single payer healthcare system where the burden is not on the employer and it's not on the employee. That's the only thing that really makes sense, and then win-win.
Well, that's a whole different show. We also want to bring in Bamboo Ear Pick. That's an interesting handle from Twitter. And this is an interesting discussion because you talked about how having more money in the market would essentially help everyone. But this person is asking, could a high wage floor lead to inflation, which would disproportionately and adversely affect low-income earners? So this is sort of to both of you.
There are only 15,000 minimum wage workers in the state. Okay, it's really not that many. We're acting here like a lot of the labor force is minimum wage. We're talking about increases for 15,000.
But it'll affect the folks.
The overall labor force is over 600,000. We've got over 600,000 people employed. There'll be some trickle up in the sense that if you increase the wages of the people who are earning relatively low wages and are some of the least productive in the society for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's inexperience with kids, sometimes it's a lack of education for adults. Then there's a trickle-up effect, so that raises wages up above. But still, we're really not talking about large numbers of workers that would be affected by this.
Well, then give me some clarity on the numbers, because earlier you said 240,000 people living in poverty.
In poverty. That's
And then you have 15,000 people making the minimum wage. So where's the disconnect
There's
here?
people who are earning above the minimum wage that are living in poverty.
And they have dependents, and they're counted
dependents.
in the poverty numbers as
Right,
well.
so we're talking about a lot of children then as well.
A lot of families with children, people are earning above the minimum wage, but they're
And also
they're still
elderly
in poverty.
parents living with them, also in poverty. Retirees, many of them are in poverty, and so that's why the number's so big.
Also, this is a cart before the horse thing. Like, inflation's happening. Wages aren't keeping up.
Right. Yeah, in a healthy economy, usually wages are ahead of the inflation. You know, if it's not being caused by oil prices or something that's not controlled. In general, if it's a healthy economy, most of the wage increases will keep ahead of the inflation increases. No guarantees, but you know, in general, that hasn't been a big problem.
We have a graphic ready on inflation as well, and we wanted to know how severely does inflation impact someone's spending power for someone living at the minimum wage. Professor, you brought this one for us. Can you explain it to us?
This one is basically trying to show that the difference between looking just at what's happened to the minimum wage over time, that's the blue line. And so the blue line shows that back in 1964, the minimum wage was only like $1. And then it's moved up today. It's moved up today to $9.25, and we'll be at $10.10 next year. So the blue line just shows it increasing over time. The red line shows what if we adjust for inflation? What if we adjust the minimum wage for the effects of higher prices for buying consumer bundles over time? And then if we look at the time when I was in high school, I hate to be bringing up that time, but that's the early 1970s, the minimum wage was up there close to $12 an hour. Okay, today it's at $9.25. So we've actually had, in inflation-adjusted terms, the minimum wage is 25% lower than when I was in high school.
Right.
Yeah.
And I hate to mention this, but it doesn't really matter whether we're looking at the nation or the state of Hawaii or any other state in the country. This is a much richer country. It's a much richer country, yet the minimum wage is 25% less. Right. And so it's really worthwhile to reframe the discussion. The discussion should be that over time, the minimum wage has declined. Okay? And that today we're finally bringing it back up to where it was back in the early 1970s.
And this is inflation. If you adjust it for productivity has skyrocketed. Wages haven't kept up. So productivity is how much value is the employee really providing the employer. There's this giant gap now. And if it was to keep up, if the minimum wage was to keep up with productivity since 1968, we'd be well past $22 an hour today.
On the national level, yeah.
On the national level.
Yeah, and you know, back when you were in high school, I assume that housing costs were a lot lower.
Yes, they were.
So you know, again, the minimum wage here in Hawaii is 25% lower, and these workers are contending with much higher cost of living than back then. So that's an argument for raising it past the historical high.
When we look at states like California, you had mentioned when we were talking before the show began that they're going to $22 pretty soon. What is the forecast for something like that? What do we expect to happen there?
Well, I think people are a little bit more worried about what will happen with a large increase like that, where the wage almost doubles. You could have some businesses leaving the state. I mean, if they have the ability to say pick up and move to Arizona, particularly if we're talking about, say, tech businesses that happen to employ a reasonable number of employees close to minimum wage. You know, there'll be employees who today are earning $15 an hour, who their wage will be raised up to $22 an hour. There's a worry in California that there'd be an excess of firms. There's not going to be an excess of fast food firms. Okay, I mean, if all the fast food prices go up, we're still going to find people buying fast food going home. But there's other types of firms that sell in export markets, and they're going to look at their costs as being raised. And they may just say, hey, there's other states that have good business environments, I'll move there.
Although that's one way that Hawaii's economy really is different, right? Most of our economy is service industries, tourist industry.
Service exports,
Right.
you know, we have a lot of service exports here. Tourism is a big service export. We have architecture exports, we have some health exports. There's education exports at the University of Hawaii when foreign students come here. Is there the ability to pass prices along? To some extent. I mean, University of Hawaii raises prices. Local families and out-of-state kids do look to other schools to potentially go to. It's something that I think states like California, this is a grand social experiment, and they may yet find some disemployment effects. There could be some adjustments. I'm certainly not advocating that we think about that in the state of Hawaii, but I think still we could easily raise the minimum wage quite a bit more.
All right, so
still do well.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so you're coming out. I introduced a bill for $22 an hour.
Right.
Now that was a moral statement saying that there should be dignity in labor, and that's a dignified wage. And if you want to go under that, like maybe 15 is probably a better number. You're right. But if you want to go under that, and you're saying like maybe we should look at housing, maybe we should look at reforming healthcare, then fine, support those bills. You know, but we need to, as a negotiating point, I thought that $22 bill was really a good starting point.
Well, then there's a viewer question that folds in right into that, which is that everyone is talking about increasing wages, which can be costly for employers and businesses. Are there other options our legislature can look at, such as subsidized transportation, housing, or food to offset the high cost of living in Hawaii? Are there measures, you know, if we look at a multi-pronged approach?
Yeah, I think Nicole could probably address.
Well, the low-income tax bills are the one that we have a coalition called the Hawaii Tax Fairness Coalition, and it's groups from Hawaii Appleseed to the Sierra Club, the Hawaii Children's Action Network, the Hawaiian Community Assets Group also are supporting it. And that's because people are being crushed by both low wages and high taxes. The taxes that are in the coalition's sort of package bill are the EITC, also the low-income renters credit, which hasn't been increased for inflation in over 30 years, so it's not worth nearly as much as it should be. And also the food credit, we actually need to renew it, and that's supposed to help address the fact that we tax groceries here. And in the package bills, we pay for it by putting back the tax rates on the highest income workers who had been paying that rate between 2009 and 2015. So putting back the tax rates would more than pay for these tax credits that would go for low-income and working-class households.
And what kind of a difference is that going to make in someone's life day to day?
Well, I talked about a single mom at minimum wage. If we had the state EITC at 20%, she'd get $664 back. The renter's credit for her, if we were to increase it for inflation, she'd probably get an extra $200 a year. And then the food credit, I think it's an extra $50 a year. Something around there. So we're getting up to a point where this really could help her not just pay for groceries, but also, again, if there's some sort of unforeseen emergency, really just keep her and her child in their home. And I think that's the really key thing, to understand how most of these working class families don't have any cushion, and it's what is causing some of the houselessness. And the housing prices are a big part of it, but also just this gap between what they're making, what they're paying in taxes, and their costs.
I mean, Professor, when we get to sort of looking at solutions, do you think that is a better approach to bring in all those sort of tax credits as opposed to trying to get a higher minimum wage?
Well, I think the only reasonable approach is to do a combination of tools here. I don't think there is a magic bullet where you just say raise minimum wage and we're done, we can all go home, or EITC will solve the problem. I mean, there's numerous parts of the tax system where we're placing taxes on people who are earning almost nothing. If we're going to have I happen to be a big supporter of having a broad-based general excise tax. I think there's all sorts of good reasons to have that. But if we have that, we should rebate much of that back to people who are in the lower 1/3 of the income distribution. There's absolutely no reason why most of that GT shouldn't be rebated back. One of the things about having a broad general excise tax is it enables us to keep it relatively low compared to some other states. It also means that tourists who come here and buy a broad sampling of goods also pay that excise tax. I mean, I think there is good reasons to tax food, given the large tourist population that we have in town.
When we think about our tourist economy, though, if we do raise our taxes and if we do raise our minimum wage, and so everything is more expensive, won't those tourists then perhaps go to Puerto Rico or go to another state? Do we then lose that tax base?
Well, we're not necessarily talking about raising taxes very much. So for example, here I think we're at a 20% EITC. We're talking about a $40 million program. Now again, that's big money. I'm not trying to minimize that. But given the overall state budget and the state economy, this is an $80 billion state economy, roughly. That's still relatively small. We're not talking here about starting some massive program. And for the people who would receive those benefits, I think it would be of great, enormous help to them.
And the tax fairness bill does identify a revenue source, which is putting back the tax rates on our highest income workers. Those are people who are working here, not the tourists. Yeah. So, they were able to afford it for 6 years. Right.
EITC came about, during the Reagan administration. It was a bipartisan measure trying to deal with welfare reform. And then during the Clinton administration, it was expanded as part of the welfare reform program. It has had bipartisan support in Congress. And it's mildly surprising just that in this state, we have not really been able to muster the political support for it. There's many other states that have it. There's some others that don't. It's a little bit surprising why some states do and some states don't. But again, this isn't really a huge program. Most of the other states, they have state EITCs that piggyback on the feds. They take 3% of the federal credit. Louisiana, there's others that take 10, there's others that take 20. The highest one is Maryland at 50, but most of the states are in there at 15 to 25%. And so this is not a huge budget program that's being proposed. But I want to know one more thing about the EITC, and that is it has all sorts of nice behavioral spillovers. So for example, families that get the EITC, the people who receive it tend to smoke less. The people who receive it tend to do more preventative health care. Okay. The people who receive it tend to eat better.
And why would that be? I mean, why would you get a tax credit and then stop smoking?
Well, part of it is that higher income people tend to smoke less. So people who have more income, they tend to choose smoking less as a way of dealing with their daily stress. That's just one of the things that we see in our society. One of the things that we note is giving people some extra money.
He's not a psychologist. He's very intelligent, but this.
But one of the things that we see generally in our society is that if you give people more money, okay, there's a myth sometimes that they're going to spend it on that they're going to spend it on goods that they shouldn't be spending it on. But on the whole, when we look at families that receive grants of money, and again, this is all tied to these people working. Okay, this can only be given if you're working the EITC. What we tend to find is people spend the money relatively well and they engage in better behaviors. It's basically the spillovers are really important. One more spillover. Okay, for every $1,000 extra given the EITC, test scores tend to rise by about 6%. Reading test scores up 6%. Okay. Math test scores up 6%. So if we're looking for a way to improve our performance in the state on these test scores, which is a big deal here, and kids learning, giving families a little bit more income tends to do a lot of things. Frees up parents to help kids a little bit more with their learning, makes a family a little more financially secure. Parents aren't out all the time totally working. There's a lot to be said to thinking about the educational spillovers.
So why hasn't the EITC happened? It's odd coming from a crazy blue state where we only have 5 Republicans left in the House and Senate. Right. Well, maybe it's because we're a victim of our own successes. We had this incredible labor movement, and we have these extremely organized unions now, but with that active grassroots swell of support that we're seeing in other states and other jurisdictions, millions of dollars somehow raised from small donations to support these types of programs like Fight for 15, Jobs with Justice, those sorts of initiatives. They're just not happening here. It's nowhere to be found. Like you talk about like rental assistance in a square building, and you have a lot of homeowners associations and condo associations come in, but where are the tenant associations? You'll see that in Seattle, you'll see that in Chicago, you'll see that in LA, you'll see that in Manhattan, but you won't see it in Honolulu. And I think we're really going to have to look, us at this 20,000 foot level is not going to change it. It's going to be some real grassroots organizing from the ground up in the working class, and I'm hoping we're going to see that soon. And I think if things get talked about enough and the cage gets shaken enough, it will happen.
Well, going back to the chamber, he's talking about shaking the cage. I think we all agree that we want to have more money in our economy. What do you think is the best way for us to get there? If it's not the minimum wage, what is the best way to help these low income earners?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question, I guess. I think it's going to be everything that we've discussed here. Like I said, the chamber 4 years ago didn't supported some increase in the minimum wage. We'll take a look after next year to see if that's something, whether it's going to be increasing more public programs, whether it's EITC or some other things. We can take a look at that. We don't have a position on that. Or as well as housing programs. I mean, I think it's going to be everything and not just, like Sumner said, just one thing that's going to help our economy. I mean, for us, regulation and mandates are probably one of the bigger things that we look at in general from an economic standpoint. How long does it take you to get a permit? Cumbersome regulations. Like I said, Coral Ridge took almost 10 years to get its permitting to build. I mean, I could go on and on of how many of these mandates and regulations come up. And again, there's always new things, right, coming down the pike of people wanting, and I understand it, to increase the quality of life of the broader community, but then who pays for it? It is most of the legislation we see is asking the employer to pay for it and not the broader community.
What about that? Are we asking too much of our employers?
No, I don't think so here.
Right.
I mean, I think it's possible we could reach a point where we are, but I don't think so right now. I think that goes back to this inflation-adjusted minimum wage slide. The minimum wage has slid for years. It's not as if it's been increasing. It's only the nominal minimum wage that's been increasing.
I would disagree with you because I think, and again, it's not just the wages. It's the prepaid health care. It's TDI. We're only one of 5 states that require TDI, and we're only one of the few states who the employer pays for it. In other states, the employees pay for it. All of these things, unemployment insurance tax, and again, we're not saying they're not good programs. We're not saying they should be abolished. What we're saying is, you go out and you try put your home on a mortgage and open a business and you hope people come in and have an academic discussion. It's not academic when your mortgage is on the line supporting your employees for your business.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think he does make a good point. We want to get to one more slide that you brought in, and that is the impact of education on the lifetime earnings of a workforce. Let's bring that up. If you could talk about that for us.
As an educator, I really try not to miss a chance to push education. But if we're looking at people in the lower 20% of the income distribution, a lot of people don't have a high school degree. They've had bad luck. They've had to drop out. It was a bad time for them. If we can get more people to get high school degrees, and substantive high school degrees, not just to get them the degree, but to have people get more education and to have more people get associate's degrees, and the same thing with BAs. The premium from getting an associate's degree is large. The premium from getting a BA degree is even larger, and the premium from getting a professional degree is even larger than that. There's a lot to be said to continue to think that in the long run, one way to solve some of our inequality problem is to ensure that more people have college degrees and that fewer people drop out of high school.
At the same time, we definitely do need a low-wage labor, not necessarily low wage, but we need a labor force that does the service economy that our state depends on. So we don't want everybody to have a postgraduate degree because the economy doesn't work.
No, that's not possible either, and that's not really what I'm recommending. But I do think we want everyone to have a high school degree. When I say everyone, that's a little too extreme. But we want almost everybody to have a high school degree.
And I think the minimum wage, the living wage, is really important in this discussion because when you think about the students who are not finishing high school, there are a lot of reasons, but one major factor is family instability, houselessness. You can imagine if your family is moving from place to place, living in the car, or whatever the conditions are of the family, it's going to be really hard to finish high school. You might also feel pressured to leave school and get a low-wage job when you're a teenager just to support your family. So whether it's the living wage or the EITC and other tax credits combined, stabilizing families is really important to have a better future for our economy, for our entire state.
I mean, I think we can all agree that education is very important. I'm not saying that it's not, but I do think that like I said, you can't have everybody with a graduate degree and expect the economy to work.
Well, there is the whole notion, too, that we're likely to see more low-wage jobs be taken by robots. We're likely to see more automation. We're likely to walk into Longs in a few more years and maybe just see self-checkouts or very few employees in the store. In order for people to get good jobs, to earn good incomes, they're going to have more skills.
Well, Amazon just opened their brick and mortar where you can actually just grab items off the shelf and walk out, and the sensors will charge your Amazon account.
So our economy has to keep up with all of our technology. That's probably a subject for another show.
But we do live in a world in which we compete internationally. Right. And internationally, kids are getting much better educations than they ever used to. Right. And we're certainly doing better here in the state of Hawaii. I'm certainly heartened by the reforms that we have. I think just the fact that we have discussed them so much, we have been experimenting, is a great thing. I think we're moving in the right direction. But kids here need to get more education if they're going to succeed in the labor force in the future.
And back to Pono's point, like, it's such a burden for employers to pay the amount they do for healthcare. And, you know, healthcare should be a right for all workers. But if it came from the government, I mean, we're already paying more than any other industrialized nation nationally for healthcare. You know, but we don't have universal healthcare like they do in every other industrialized nation. So, you know, let's fix that on the national level.
We should have a show on that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Honestly.
I think that's the topic
keep bringing it back. Like that's one of the main problems. And I mean, I agree.
Okay, well, we have to leave it there. Thank you all for joining us. Mahalo to you for joining us tonight. Of course, thank you to our guest, Nicole Wu from the Hawaii Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice, Pono Chong from the Hawaii Chamber of Commerce, Sumner LaCroix from the University of Hawaii, and Maui State Representative Kaniela Ing. Next week's right here on Insights, all the news about digital surveillance, hacking, and breaches of confidential data. So how cyber secure are you, and what can we all do to protect ourselves? I'm Yanji Denise for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Until next time, a hui hou.